Sorry, everybody. I'm having some technical difficulties tonight, but now I think I'm all right. I have no more technical difficulties. But this, of course, is Empowering Democracy, and I'm Joe Firestone, your host. And the title of this stream is RFKJ Defeats the Spoiler Narrative, Pepe Escobar's BRIC-O-Rama Part 2. So we have two topics tonight. Things have gone sadly awry, of course. So I'm very late in starting. I hope you'll forgive me. I see that Steve Wolfbrand is here. At least I noticed that. I don't know if anybody is here right now. But if you are, please announce yourself so I have some idea. And please share this to Facebook, okay, if you would. That will be good. I'm going to check out and see if Facebook is operating all right before I really start. I appear to be okay on Facebook, but okay, so I'm going to get to it. There was a big announcement, I guess, on May 1st, okay, on Bobby Kennedy's campaign. And the big announcement was an offer of his that he made to Joe Biden and secondarily to Donald Trump. This was actually very important because it was Bobby Kennedy's answer to the idea that he is a spoiler. There was a major poll that was done by the John Zogby 50-state poll from April 24th to April 21st. Okay, and this poll, this 50-state poll, with 26,000 likely voters across the country, and a margin of error of only 0.6%, had some findings. So what did this poll find? And I'm going to share something from Bobby Kennedy's website for you, which tells us what this poll found. It found that if the election were held, today, and it were a two-person race between President Trump and Biden, or Presidents Trump, and Biden, and Bobby Kennedy were to drop out, or when it's just a two-person race, head-to-head, Bobby Kennedy's not included, Trump would win by 294 to 244 electoral votes. Now, since this state polled all 50 states, it could come up with the 50 state election results, that is to say, with the likely electoral college results. That's why the vote was 294 to 244, stated that way rather than stated as a percentage of the popular vote. So, in the three-way race between Biden, Trump, and Kennedy, Kennedy's presence shifts the states of Maine and Virginia to Biden's column, and those states are shifted to Trump's column. So Kennedy's presence helps Biden, but Biden still loses to Trump. They don't show the map of that. But the point is, Trump is the winner by more. Now, if Trump, for some reason, were to be knocked out of the race, or to decide to drop out of the race, or if he had a heart attack, or whatever. There's no chat tonight. Why wouldn't there be a chat? Let me see. Why don't I have a chat? I'm sorry, this got a little screwed up here tonight. Oh, I see a chat. Hey, Kay, I see you. I see you in the chat. I see you at 8:31. So, anyway, going back to the results here. In that two-person race, if it could occur, Kennedy would beat Biden by a landslide, 367 votes to 171 votes. Now, this is according to this Zogby 50-state poll. $26,000 person sample. Much more rigorous poll than I usually conduct. And I believe that this poll was actually funded by the Kennedy campaign. Anyway, even if President Trump were to drop out, President Biden can't win. In fact, if Trump drops out, Kennedy wins in 196 electoral vote, a landslide. And of course, what is the result if Kennedy runs against President Trump and Biden drops out? So the result of that is that Kennedy still wins, but only by 2 votes, 270 to 268. So to summarize, the argument of the Kennedy campaign is only Kennedy can beat Donald Trump in 2024. And then he addresses the idea that he's a spoiler. Of course, I'm reading from the Kennedy24.com website here, Kennedy24.com/spoiler. To be a spoiler, a candidate has to fulfill two requirements. First, they must not be able to win themselves. And second, by participating in the election, they must prevent someone else from winning who otherwise would, unquote, Kennedy explained. By that criterion, the only spoiler in the race is President Biden. He is the one who cannot win against either candidate and whose presence gives Trump the victory instead of Kennedy. After presenting the detailed findings at a press conference on May 1st in Brooklyn, New York, Kennedy called on President Biden to step aside so that he could provide American voters with their only viable alternative for 4 more years of Trump. So here's some facts about this poll. What makes this poll different from all others out there? First, the sample size. Most presidential polls rely on responses from around 2,000 people. That means they have a margin. They have a margin of error of, well, I don't know, 3 percentage points, 4 percentage points, maybe 5 percentage points. These include polls like the Quinnipiac poll, the New York Times Siena poll, the Harvard-Harris poll, the Gallup poll. Okay, but the Zogby Strategies poll, this one had 26,408 people, so the margin of error was 0.6%. Second, this is the first poll of the 2024 cycle to measure the winner of each state in order to tally the electoral votes that actually determine who takes the White House. Why does that matter? Just look at 2016. An accurate national poll would have told you Hillary Clinton was ahead by 2 points. But what it wouldn't have told you is that she was behind by 77 electoral votes and therefore would lose. Only a 50-state poll can tell you that. The poll was fielded between April 13th and April 21st. With 26,408 responses, you can explore the full state-by-state breakdown here, and they give you a link. You can find more state polling information here. So there is that information to delve further into this if you would like to delve further into it. But in his presentation, their presentation actually, Bobby Kennedy's and Amaryllis Fox Kennedy, his campaign manager and his daughter-in-law, Bobby Kennedy talked for a while in this presentation, then he turned it over to Amaryllis to present, the results, which I have just given you. And then he came back to wind things up and to make a proposal to Joe Biden and to President Trump, though he also admitted or stated very clearly that President Trump in this situation would not normally be considered a spoiler because he is leading the race in relation to the results of this poll. But Bobby's proposal, at the end of this, and it's very significant, I think, that he made this proposal because this really underlines the argument and issues a challenge. He's not just claiming to be a spoiler, but he's putting an offer out there the offer is based on who's the spoiler, and it's based on an agreement that the spoiler will drop out. And of course, he points out that a spoiler, according to the results of this poll, spoiler, okay, is Joe Biden, but the real issue here is who's going to be the spoiler very late in the campaign. Who would be the spoiler if this went to election day with the three of them in it? So his proposal is that both parties, his party, okay, and the Democrat Party, agree to co-fund a 50-state poll in mid-October 2024 of 30,000 plus likely voters. The survey will test the results of a head-to-head race pitting President Biden against President Trump, and a second head-to-head race pitting Mr. Kennedy against President Trump. Both parties pledge that whoever performs weakest against President Trump in a two-man contest will drop out of the presidential race. So that is really hugely interesting, isn't it? He's basically putting, his money where his mouth is. By the way, I should state that this first 50-state poll from Zogby seems to have cost the campaign, if I'm right that he funded it, seems to have cost the campaign roughly $500,000. So to make this argument, I think this is a brilliant political move. He spent $500,000, which underlines, of course, the usefulness to this campaign of his vice presidential candidate, Nicole Shanahan, who, of course, can spend $500,000 anytime she wants. But I don't know that she funded this, but it's quite likely that she did. But he is saying to President Biden, basically, if in mid-October the results show that you're ahead of me in a prospective two-person race, if you're ahead of me in a two-person race that's polled against President Trump at that time, then I am pledging that if I perform the weakest in a two-man contest, that I'm going to drop out of the presidential race. And he's challenging Joe Biden to make the same sort of pledge. Now, I don't think Joe Biden is going to take this pledge, and so I don't think that Kennedy is going to be called upon to make this no spoiler pledge himself, because Biden's just not going to accept the offer. He probably figures he's ahead of Kennedy now anyway, so why should he accept the offer? But of course, the beauty of this, the beauty of it is that now when anybody makes the spoiler argument against RFKJ, all he has to do to defeat the spoiler argument is to have his supporters come back and say, look, we have an offer on the table. If you think that RFKJ is the spoiler, all you have to do is accept his offer to poll 30,000 people in all 50 states, in the middle of October. And if you do better against Trump than he does at that time, then he's going to drop out of this race. He's agreed to drop out of this space so that on election day, there will be only the two of you. And therefore, I won't be pulling any votes from you. I won't be the spoiler because I won't be there. On the other hand, for me to make this pledge, you have to do the same thing. So why did Bobby Kennedy do that? So his supporters can come back with this offer to the spoiler charge. So he can say at any point, look, I'm not the spoiler. I'm willing to poll this, okay, in the middle of October. And if I turn out to be the spoiler, according to this poll again, okay, in October, then I'll drop out and I'll leave the contest to you and Trump. I might have spent all kinds of money by then. I might have spent $500 million by then, but I'm still willing to drop out if you come out ahead of me in this polling contest, okay, in the middle of October. He's saying that to President Biden. He's also saying that to President Trump. But since President Trump is not accusing him of being the spoiler, then it wouldn't be necessary for President Trump to accept the same offer. On the other hand, President Trump seems to be attacking Bobby Kennedy a lot lately on the theory that Bobby Kennedy is drawing more votes from Trump than he's drawing from Biden. So that may become a relevant concern. Of course, it would be best if both of them were to accept his offer. But if neither of them accepts it, as is quite likely, well, his supporters can always say, shut up about his being a spoiler, because he's made this offer, and you two guys are the ones who are afraid, okay, to accept it. So there it is. I think a very interesting offer. I think it was a great political move for him to make it. It ends the argument, it seems to me, that he's the spoiler. His people, his supporters can always come back with this offer now from here on in and say, well, he's willing to make a no-spoiler pledge. Is Joe Biden willing to make a no-spoiler pledge? Is Donald Trump, is he willing to make a no-spoiler pledge? That becomes, okay, the issue, of course. So, I'm going to stop sharing that, but I want to share something briefly with you. Robert Copeland says, I would not accept this pledge if I were President Biden. Well, of course. You're quite right, Robert. You're quite right. He shouldn't accept it. But on the other hand, if he doesn't accept it, he can't go on moaning that Robert Kennedy is the spoiler. That's the beauty of this pledge. Brandy says, I'm predicting a Joe Biden loss and hoping neither Trump nor Biden get enough electorals to win. Well, I don't think that's good because that throws the Electoral College into the House. Then, either the Democrats, okay, or the Republicans will have more states to their credit, okay, in the election of November 2024, and whichever party controls the most states, okay, in the Electoral College will then be able to select who they want to be the president of the United States. The Republicans will certainly go for Trump, and the Democrats will certainly go for Biden. That doesn't help us, Brandy. That doesn't help us. So, how many people how many people there were in the poll are still undecided? I don't know. I haven't examined, but I will examine, of course, in detail, all of the state results uh, for this election. Okay, I agree here with all your comments. I really don't care about polls this far from the November elections. But again, that's not really the point. But Bobby Kennedy is being called the spoiler. You know, Democratic ads coming out all the time, charging him with being a spoiler, asking him to withdraw. His response is, this most data-filled poll of the campaign so far, with a margin of error of 0.6%, okay, is telling us that Bobby Kennedy is not the spoiler, but Joe Biden is the spoiler. That's what it's telling us. So Joe Biden needs to shut up about Bobby Kennedy being the spoiler, because the data show he is not, okay, the spoiler. Now, one thing Biden could do is to commission a state poll of his own, costing $500,000. I mean, he has all kinds of money. He could easily do that, and then he could present, okay, the results and say, see, Bobby Kennedy is a spoiler. And then they could trade polls. And maybe in some of these polls, Donald Trump would come up at the spoiler. Who knows? However, you got to be kidding. RFK is nothing but a spoiler. Okay, vote blue no matter who. The poll doesn't show that RFK is the spoiler. It shows by a large margin that the spoiler is Joe Biden. Because in a head-to-head race with Joe Biden, Bobby Kennedy would beat him by 186 electoral votes. And in these matchups, head-to-head matchups of the three candidates, the only one of the candidates who can beat Trump in a two-person race is Bobby Kennedy. Biden can't beat Bobby Kennedy, and he can't beat Trump. He would lose to Trump by a substantial margin. And by the way, Trump is beginning to gain over him, as we see from the polls. He's sinking more and more and more in the polls. He has, in recent polls, the lowest poll rating for any incumbent president in 70 years. And I can tell you who that goes back to. It goes back to Harry Truman in the early 1950s, when at one point his favorability rating dropped to 23%. Biden is really in trouble. There's no question, okay, about that. But what Bobby Kennedy proved in this poll is that if anyone's a spoiler, it is Joe Biden. Now, it's up to Joe Biden, it seems to me, to refute that contention. Steve Wolf says, Robert, I think a debate that included RFK would change the landscape dramatically, but that's probably not going to happen. Yeah, of course, they're going to avoid that like the plague. And Brandy says, I'm predicting a Joe Biden loss and hoping neither Trump nor Biden gets enough electoral votes to win. Yeah, I sort of hope that too, but I don't want to throw it into the House. I want a third-party candidate to get a majority of the electoral votes. Robert Copeland says, I would not accept this pledge if I were President Biden. Brandy says, I would rather have Greens get the win, but I really want to break the system. Well, the system can't be broken because the election will simply be thrown into the House. And in the House, which is dominated by the two parties right now. One of the parties is going to select the person they want, okay, to be the president. Since Trump controls the Republican Party, he will win. Trump will win more states than President Biden, a two-man race. Yeah, that's what the poll shows. Exactly what the poll you don't trust shows, Robert. Case says RFK is as nuts, okay, as Rump. Well, maybe he is, okay, but RFK, right now at least, at this point in time, is not explicitly supporting, okay, a genocide. He hasn't come out and said that he's supporting the Israelis, okay, at least not in the last 2 or 3 weeks, okay. So Brandy says Biden has screwed himself with the Arab population and with the youth after his press conference today. I couldn't agree more. He screwed himself. He's going to lose. Robert says RFK has a better ground game here in Sacramento than either Biden or Trump. Oh, by the way, RFK has also announced, of course, that he's on the ballot in California. That seems to be a definite. And he's also announced that he has enough signatures to get on the ballot in New York, but before they turn in the signatures, they're going to attempt to get twice the amount they need to get for him to be on the ballot, okay, in New York. I believe he said that he thinks that process is going to be done in just a few weeks. So he's quite confident, okay, about that. I did want to call attention, though, to something he said, okay, in the YouTube. Let me see if I can find it. Hateful towards the other guy's followers, so they're not going to change. So I wanted you to hear this. This started about 4:05. $34 trillion over the past 100 days. President Biden has added $1 trillion to that. Within 5 years, every 50 cents out of every tax dollar that we collect is going to go to servicing the debt. Example is the budget deficit, $34 trillion. There it is. His constant harping on the national debt, okay, is an issue. $34 trillion is closer now to $35 trillion, but that's all right. He always engages in that kind of terrorism when he's talking about the campaign issues. That campaign issue is at the forefront of his campaign. Over the past 100 days, President Biden has added $1 trillion to that. Within 5 years, every 50 cents out of every tax dollar that we collect is going to go to servicing the debt. Okay, of course, tax dollars do not go to spending. They offset spending, okay, from the standpoint, okay, of it being disinflationary, but they don't go towards spending. Of course, that's Bobby Kennedy not knowing anything about the MMT approach, okay, to economics. His worry about the size of the debt, the whole debt issue, okay, is him saying, I don't know any MMT at all. I don't know that we don't have to be worried about this because the United States is, okay, a monetary sovereign. Now, of course, in this stream, I have talked for years, okay, and years now. I've been pointing out to you that if anybody's really worried about, okay, the debt, the size of the debt, okay, if it's a real issue, for them. Then they can do one of two things. They can mint a platinum coin that is large enough to use to pay off the debt. I usually suggest $100 trillion platinum coin law of 1995, if I recall correctly, gives the Treasury Secretary the authority to mint such a coin. Then $100 trillion flows into the Treasury spending account that can be used to cover any deficits for a period of perhaps, I don't know, maybe roughly 10 years or something like that, or 15 years or something like that. And of course, it covers the repayment of the 35 trillion in debt right now, so that in 30 years, because you don't want to pay off the debt too fast, that would be an inflationary move. But if you pay off the debt as it falls due, and more than half of it is going to fall due in the next 2 or 3 years, then, of course, it's not a problem anymore. The money's there for the federal government to spend when it has an appropriation from Congress. If it doesn't have an appropriation from Congress, it cannot spend any of this money sitting in the Treasury spending account. But anyway, that's one way to handle it. The second way to handle it that I've often spoken about is called overt congressional financing. And in overt congressional financing, what that's about is when the Congress does an appropriation, it sticks 2 sentences of boilerplate onto the association. In those 2 sentences, the first sentence says that the amount of the appropriation in reserves is to be placed by the Federal Reserve in the Treasury spending account as soon as the president signs off, on the appropriation. And the second sentence says that there also should be, an additional amount of reserves put in the Treasury spending account so that all the repayments of principal and interest that are due during the period of the appropriation are covered by the additions to the reserve account. So that means that at the start, as soon as the appropriation is signed by the president, the money covering all repayment of debt for the period of the appropriation, all interest payments for the period of the appropriation, and all the government spending for the period of appropriation is placed in the Treasury spending account. That means the money is there regardless of tax revenues, which actually are not used to pay for anything anyway. And regardless of anything else that goes on during that particular period of time. In other words, the Treasury is fully funded for the amount of the appropriation so it can do the mandated spending. That happens up front. It is no longer dependent on any issuance of debt instruments. It is no longer dependent, on any tax revenues. Now, I've often said tax revenues don't get used for spending anyway, so why would it be dependent on tax revenues in the first place? Well, it's dependent on tax revenues because the Federal Reserve has a business rule that while it's settling the tax deposits, even though it's destroying the tax deposits, it's putting an equivalent amount of money into the Treasury spending account. So, for example, if $4 trillion is collected, okay, in taxes, yes, when that is settled by the Federal Reserve, it gets rid of, okay, the $4 billion. It zeroes them out, but it gives the Treasury spending account, okay, another $4 trillion to spend. So the Federal Reserve would have to change that particular business rule. If the money was going into the Treasury account up front through overt congressional financing, okay, then the Federal Reserve would have to quit creating new money when it zeroed out, okay, the taxes. But that's very easy for the Federal Reserve to do. It doesn't need any legislation to do that. It could just say, okay, we're not going to double pay on the appropriation. We're going to recognize what really goes on. We're going to zero out the tax deposits, okay, and we're not going to put the equivalent of that money into the Treasury spending account. So that's easy to do. So these are two ways, okay, if Bobby Kennedy is worried about, okay, the debt, here are two solutions for him, which of course he doesn't happen to know about because he seems to be completely ignorant of MMT. So, Robert Klum, that includes all the other polls that I have seen between Biden or Trump. Thank you, Robert. He's talking about RFK having a better ground game here in Sacramento than either Biden or Trump. And Liz says, if anyone is interested in the health of their children, there's only one choice for president. Are you suggesting, Liz, that choice is Jill Stein by any chance? You may well be right. And Steve Oprin says, Doc, could the House choose someone other than the candidates to avoid a revolution, for example? And Steve, yes, Steve, the House is able to choose someone else as the president, okay, of the United States. It can choose whoever they want as the president of the United States. It could choose Jill Stein as the president of the United States. If it's a Democratic House, it could probably choose Barack Obama again and then schedule another election, since he would have only 2 more years that he could serve according to the Constitution. It could choose whoever they want, okay, to vote for. But the House votes by state, and each state has one vote. So, for example, if there are more Republican states than Democratic states, okay, let's say the margin is it is now, I think now the margin is 26 Republican states to 24 Democratic states. So the vote then is going to be 26 to 24 for president for a particular candidate. If the Democrats sweep, okay, the House, which they may do due to the abortion issue, if they're very successful in the House race, okay, this time, and they get, they end up controlling, let's say, 27 states, so it's 27 states to 23 states, then the vote would probably be 27 to 23 in favor of Biden. Or maybe if the House thought Biden was too old, they might, throw the election to somebody else, to avoid a revolution, though who that would be, I mean, maybe they'd be scared enough to throw the presidency to Bernie Sanders. That would be interesting, I suppose. But anyway, Brandy says, I will still support Stein because I believe Biden, Trump, and RFK support for Israel is dangerous. I do too. But I would like to see Bobby Kennedy make a more recent statement about his feelings about the genocide. I want to see how he responds to the question. Okay, Mr. Kennedy, are you in favor of the genocide going on in Gaza? Do you support Israel in what the ICJ has accused it of, specifically committing genocide in Gaza? I would like to see how he answers that. It seems to me this time around he's going to answer that in a very different way. Liz Letherland said, one way or another, we pay. That is, money to other countries does nothing to fix our infrastructure, especially our crumbling nuclear facilities for our homeless, for our vets, etc. Well, the money, as I've told you numerous times, and I've just spoken to the question here, it's not a problem, because we can do the platinum coin or we can do overt congressional financing. Money is not the problem. The problem is this Congress and these presidents, and we need to replace them because they're bought by the money. We need to get people into Congress who will stop sending money to Israel and stop sending money to Ukraine. And stop sending money to Taiwan in order to repel a threat from China, which, if we leave things alone, will just naturally happen. Taiwan issue will naturally be settled according to the Chinese schedule, which used to be 2050, but we're in the process of speeding it up. Brandy says, right, Joe. Jill Stein, 2024. Kay says, true, Liz. Last I knew, Kennedy has accused the Palestinians as being privileged. Yeah, I know. I saw that too. That was so ridiculous. I really couldn't stand that. Kennedy was a real asshole about that, just as he's a real asshole about, the debt issue. And it's not a trivial issue. His position on it is costly from a political point of view. Because doing something about the debt means drawing out, in his conception of things, it means drawing out excessive money from the private sector, which will bring us recessions and stop any creative action that could be done to bring the climate emergency under control. And RFK has problems when it comes to the climate emergency. He doesn't really recognize the climate emergency. He hasn't been for the Green New Deal, even though he's very strong on the environment. He's got some convoluted thinking suggesting that there's no climate emergency, or that's not the primary issue. This is crazy. Yeah, so I saw that too. So, okay, here we go. I originally intended to go over a new piece by Pepe Escobar for this stream, but my technical difficulties with my alarm clock caused things to get all screwed up. So I believe it's time for Dee's stream. I think she has a 9 o'clock stream. It's more than time for it. And I don't want to cut into the audience for her stream at this point because of my technical difficulty. So I'm going to postpone the treatment of the Pepe Escobar, the new article, until tomorrow. And if it's okay with all of you, I'm going to end this stream now so that we can all go over to Dee's stream. And I don't even know what she's doing for tonight. but I expect it's going to be on the situation in Israel, in Palestine. Okay, most likely. Let me just double check that. I think she's going to talk about the Anti-Semitism Act and certain other things. Also Netanyahu. But anyway, I'm going to go over and join her and contribute what I can, okay, tonight. I thank you all for coming here. In spite of all the technical difficulties and the screwing up and everything, there's been fair attendance here. So that's okay. But I don't want to cut into Dee's attendance, and I want to contribute what I can to her show. So good night, everybody. I'll see you all tomorrow, okay, at 8 o'clock. I promise I'll be there, okay, at 8 o'clock. And I'll either have a new alarm clock by then, or I will, I just won't be taking a nap before the stream tomorrow night, one or the other. So good night. I'll see you at Dee's.